Hi folks, I'm Jess. I'm your friendly neighbourhood NDIS educator. I represent VIMIAC, that's the Victorian Mental Illness Awareness Council. It's a really long acronym that basically means that we're the peak body who support people in Victoria with mental illness. In plain English, that means we're out there, we're on your side. At VIMIAC, we are really passionate about helping people with mental illness get a fair go in life. And that's basically why my role exists, to ensure that anyone with a mental illness who wants to apply for the NDIS has a really good chance at actually being successful with their application. Because let's be real, applying for the NDIS is really confusing. You might not necessarily know if it suits you or if it's appropriate. And it's even more confusing if you're someone with mental illness, because the NDIS was never really designed with us in mind. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm just so excited to be here. I've got my lights, I've got my camera, I'm feeling like a movie star. But basically those are the sorts of things that we're going to be talking about throughout this series. So anyway, you might be wondering, what is the NDIS? And I totally get that, because when I tell people my job is to teach people about the NDIS, they kind of give me a funny look like, oh yeah, because most people have heard of the NDIS, but they might not know exactly what it is, or they just know that it's there to help people with disability, but they don't really know how it works. Well, the NDIS is a new way of providing support to people with disabilities in Australia. So in the past, funding might have been given to an organisation like a community centre, whereas now the funding actually gets given to the individual, which they can spend on a community centre or various other sorts of supports. So it really helps the participant in the NDIS get lots of freedom and choice about how they use their funding. So the NDIS is designed to basically help people with a disability, including mental illness, which they call a psychosocial disability, to live a full life, what they often call an ordinary life, which is a bit of a strange term. It's relative to everyone, I guess, but to live a life that you deserve and that you want. So this might be being involved in the community, or getting engaged in economic ways, or really sort of building your capacity to do the things that you want. So the sorts of supports might be something like joining a choir, or getting support to get travel, or playing a sport, or even getting someone to help you around the house so you feel more comfortable and safe in your own home. The real purpose of the NDIS is to help build your capacity and to help you live the kind of life that you want to. It's also designed to sort of decrease your reliance on those supports in the future, so that potentially if you do something like volunteering and they support you to volunteer, you might be able to work in the future, which makes you more independent. So you might be wondering, is the NDIS right for me? Well, first you need to look at the eligibility criteria. So the eligibility criteria sort of, do you live in Australia? Are you an Australian resident? Or do you have special visa exemptions that allow you to live and work in Australia? Are you under 65? Because if someone's over 65, it might be more appropriate for them to be on the aged care pension. And also, do you live in an area where the NDIS is rolled out? And finally, do you have a permanent and significant disability? Dun dun dun! Whoa, hold on. What does permanent and significant even mean? And I think that's a big thing with the NDIS. They use a lot of words, complicated words, to explain something that's actually quite simple. So with permanent, that means that your disability is there with you for life, which can be quite a confronting question, especially with mental illness, because we often think about wanting to recover. We might not think about this as being something that's with us for life. The other thing to consider is your disability significant? So does it have a significant impact on your life? Basically that means, are you substantially impaired and across the different sorts of functional areas that we'll talk about? And this can be quite confronting too, because I know for me, I think that I am, significantly and substantially impaired. I feel like things are really difficult for me, but the NDIS might not necessarily agree. This is because the NDIS defines substantial impairment in relation to 6 functional areas. So those would be learning, self-care, self-management, social interaction, communication, and mobility. So in order to be determined as having a substantial impairment, something would have to be actually extremely difficult to do where you can't complete the activity. So that might be something like social interaction, where you want to go out and see friends, but you might cancel last minute and you find it really difficult to go out and see people, or as opposed to going and seeing them and struggling and being very anxious, which would be a partial impairment as opposed to a complete impairment. So let's work for an example. So someone like me, I have bipolar. I have several other diagnoses, but bipolar would be considered my primary diagnosis, as according to the NDIS. And like I said, I do feel like I struggle a lot sometimes, but in different areas. So if you look at the functional impairment areas in the NDIS, in terms of mobility, I get around all right. I don't drive, I'm learning to drive. I'm finally learning to drive at the ripe old age of 24. And but I get trains everywhere and I'm okay getting around by myself. In terms of communication, if you've gotten this far into the video, you know I have no problem with communication. And social interaction, I do make sure to see at least a couple of friends a week, and I have a romantic partner who I have quite a very good relationship with. They might be watching this. And so in those areas, I'm quite okay. But in some of the other areas, it can be a bit conflicting. So I struggle with my self-care quite a lot. And you know, I had to make sure before I came in to record these videos that I remembered to brush my teeth, because I hadn't brushed my teeth in probably a week and a half. So I wanted to have shiny white teeth for all of you. In terms of self-management, I struggle with things like paying my bills and cleaning up after myself and cooking. But I guess I'm not stopped from doing these things entirely. They're sort of partial impairments. And I'd be the kind of case which would be a bit confusing and difficult to determine for the NDIS. And on top of that, in terms of my learning, I have struggled a lot with university. I study part-time to account for that, and I get a lot of extensions on assignments. But I've actually been able to complete university. I have an honours degree in psychology. So even though I feel like I struggle a lot with study and learning, the NDIS might not necessarily agree. And this is where it can be really confusing, because like I said, you might feel like you're impaired, but the NDIS might not think you're impaired enough. So it's hard to say whether I would satisfy the criteria of having a significant and permanent disability. And that's why I would say it's worth just giving it a go and, you know, figuring out if you do and going through the process, because I think for someone like me, it's easy to ride yourself off because you focus on what you can do, because you don't like thinking about what you can't do. But yeah, it's sort of something to consider, that it's a bit of a grey area, this permanent and significant, and it's worth, if you're not in the race, you're not in the race. It's worth putting your best foot forward. This process of also trying to prove that your disability is permanent and significant, I feel like confronting is the word I've used a million times in this video, and that's true. It can be quite confronting actually trying to have your experience validated by doctors and these assessors. So it's important to look after yourself if you do choose to apply for the NDIS, because it can be quite a challenging process. Speaking of support and looking after yourself throughout the process of applying for the NDIS, VMIAC is really vamping up our support in this area. So we've got people who are advocates for when you're going for the appeals and reviews process. We've also got education, which is me, among others. And we're actually employing someone to be more ongoing support for people through the application process too. And we'll be creating all sorts of online resources like podcasts and videos and fact sheets and blogs. I'll be writing blogs as well, so you can just keep hearing me talk. So if you want to look us up, it's VMIAC. You'll find all our resources on our website. That's it for me. I hope you've enjoyed our first video on the NDIS. Next time we'll be talking about how to actually apply for the NDIS. Ooh, how exciting. All right, thanks so much for joining me. I'll see you next time. Bye.